you have scatter gather, it can do in a different way, versus with scatter gather it can do in a different way. I don't want to get too much into the subject, but you can see there. So you can see there GSO is on here versus GSO is off here, and it is requested on, it shows, and stuff like that you can see there. So there are subtle features. Something which is supported in that NIC card is not done here, and some are done in both the cases. So whichever is supported in both the NIC cards, of course this diff is not going to show them, okay, or if it is disabled in both the NIC cards, it is not going to show them. So this is what happens on a traditional NIC card. So these are like traditional NIC cards. So when it comes to smart NIC cards, sometimes you can have say for instance a VPN server. For instance, if you build any network VPN server, it has to encrypt each packet. Then you can even offload that encryption as well on the NIC card, rather than you do it in the Linux kernel and kernel struggling to do that encryption. Always understand, people who are new to system, so they imagine anything you do in kernel, it is going to be more optimized and more at a higher performance than in user space and stuff. See, the advantage you get in user space is it is quite easy to split the work, whatever the load, into multiple chunks through multiple processes or through multiple threads, whichever way you architect. It's quite easy in user space. The cumbersome thing about Linux kernel is you are now, whatever you do, you are now part of some alien code, which is the kernel itself, because kernel is written by, hundreds or thousands of developers, and the code is always constantly changing and stuff. Suddenly today you do some feature in a Linux kernel, some module, tomorrow the module may not compile in the upcoming mainline kernel, and you need to do some porting and stuff. See, it is always cumbersome as you do anything in kernel space, okay. It's not a question of skill, it's not a question of how much you can debug and stuff. I do get often queries on people do ask about kernel debugging and something like that. It is nothing to do with skill, it's a kind of a issue with business logistics, I can say, okay. So anything you do in kernel, the problem is the code is always changing, and moreover it's a alien code. It is somebody's code where you are trying to fit your stuff inside the kernel. So let's assume I get a customer, and the customer or a client, and I have my own toffee, for instance, okay. So I have my own stuff, or I have my customer's work, and he is telling me to do a particular thing on packets. Provided a choice, rather than doing in the kernel and wasting my life, I will do it in the user space, and I may compromise the performance in other means, okay. It is more economical to do in user space and compromise some amount of performance, rather than breaking my head and putting inside the Linux kernel and struggling to fit this fancy thing inside some alien code of Linux kernel. So although it is open source, the code is not ours, the code always changes, and this is a quite nightmare in terms of managing the code. See, it is easy to write the code is one aspect, it is difficult to manage the code. It is also more expensive to maintain a code base in Linux kernel. It needs lot of time, and lot of time is equal to more money for you need to pay to the developers. Let's assume you have a particular work. Let's assume I'm a CTO, and if I budget a amount for this amount of work, if it is done in Linux kernel or if it is done in user space, I consider that budget, and I don't like something it takes 6 months in Linux kernel versus a month in user space. So I need to take all these things into consideration. Similarly, although I am not a CTO, I do consider as an architect, because my clients do approach me as a technical architect. So I need to work out all these challenges or aspects before I come up with any solution. I can do myself, or of course if they have in-house team, they have their own team, their team may do that. So it doesn't matter, okay. It's a question of how much money you need to waste by putting this into the Linux kernel, how much time it takes, how reliable the code is, the outcome is, and versus you do in user space, how easy to manage in user space versus how easy to manage in kernel space. All these things matters. So that's why I'm saying in this case you can see there are certain features. These are very typical NIC card specific features, but other than that, if you have any user space applications, like I mentioned, it has to do compressing packets, it has to do encryption of packets, or if you want to do something else, you can offload it to the NIC card itself. Sometimes these NIC cards, strangely, the smart NIC cards may even have some type of ARM processor and stuff. I even recently stumbled across an interesting hardware. You can see there, smart NIC card. Is this the article? Yeah, you can see that it is March 3rd, quite recent. Today it is March 7th, 2020. You can see that it's a smart NIC card, and it's a quite interesting hardware. I can just bookmark in this video description. If you are interested, you can go through that hardware. And they have also mentioned what it contains. It contains a custom FPGA with all that custom features, and they also mention what is that it is offering, traditional versus the new NIC card and stuff. See, this is a thing. If you are a beginner, you don't it doesn't make any difference. If you are a beginner, you are new to everything. If you are an architect, if you are in that business stuff, so you can take people like us, we take a decision. Okay, why not we get this, and why not we optimize and make a product and sell to our customers and stuff. So I need to think like that for my clients actually. So you can see that it offers some features in the traditional model. Let's take this image. It's quite an interesting image. So the traditional model, it is doing sockets, and then it goes to TCP and network driver, and it goes to the real networking hardware. So this is what happens in the traditional sense, versus with this NIC card we can bypass directly from that sockets to that the NIC card adapter, and in this way you can directly push packets, bypassing the entire dodgy Linux kernel. The big problem with the kernel is the performance overhead when you do at that high rate, packet rate. So you can see there, you can completely bypass the Linux kernel and do certain things in the NIC card. So that's what is this picture says, and they say that it's a reduced latency 80% compared to standard Linux kernel methods and stuff. So if you are very new, then again you will get confused. There is always people appreciated about Linux kernel by seeing my channel itself named as Linux channel. How can you degrade Linux kernel and stuff? It is true, but the whole kernel itself works on a CPU, and a CPU, whatever works on CPU is always going to be having bottlenecks versus a hardware like this, because here there is no CPU cycles. It's just a custom hardware. It's a custom ASIC and FPGA. It just goes there, and it may take maybe 5 CPU cycles. What CPU must have taken around 3000 cycles or 2000 cycles, it may just take around 5 to 20 CPU cycles, and it can finish the job, because it does everything in the hardware. You just need to send whatever the data, and call that appropriate driver API provided by the NIC card guys or the NIC card vendor, and then NIC card will take that chunk, the buffer, whatever you write. It may be a packet, or it may be just a data what you are supposed to send it via sockets, a chunk of a file or something. It will just take that, and it will just do that operation and send it out. So all these things are possible. So that's what they mention. So apart from that, they can mention like where it suits and targeted audience and stuff like that. And apart from that, generally you can also search other. We see if there is any other smart NIC cards are there. Generally we can Google, and you can see there are various vendors who does what makes a NIC a smart NIC. Yeah, you can read any of these articles. So perhaps now the other brands may offer other elaborate features. So as a part of competition, someone may offer something. Someone's targeted audience may be for a particular use case, like compression, encryption and stuff. Somebody may use it for other extensive network security and stuff like that. So it really depends, like the vendor is targeting what type of use case for its hardware offering. So that's what. So you can see there whatever the traditional NIC offers versus this intelligent and smart NIC card offers and stuff like that. So this is from Mellanox, and yeah, they have other page, and the other one is from metronome, and they do have some amount of theory about what is a NIC card. What is this smart NIC card versus the traditional NIC card. You can see there, as we have all this NFVs in the current modern scenario, generally you have this network function virtualization. Sometimes you can provide a role of network routing or something like that done in the NIC card, rather than pulling these packets in the Linux kernel, and kernel is struggling with dealing this amount of high packet rate in kernel networking subsystem. So it's what it is. So you can see there, maybe you can I can bookmark couple of these links so that you can have a look in case if you are interested. So it's a complete vendor specific thing. Sometimes you can't expect one vendor offers something as a part of smart NIC card, others have to offer the same. It is completely vendor specific, because this is where the fun part starts. Okay, everyone can do a small NIC cards like this, a typical dumb NIC card, or with some offload features like what you saw here. Everyone can make, but smart NIC card is quite interesting. This is where anyone can make money versus this is where it's more like a consumable product. So in business, we consider anything as consumables, like you have all this pens, the refill inside this pen is a consumable, and printer ink is a consumable. Similarly, this lead inside this pencil is a consumable. As you write, it is going off, and then once it is depleted, you need a new pencil and with full lead. Okay, so these are all consumables. So similarly, these NIC cards are more like consumables versus these smart NIC cards are all meant for high-end products which has unique use cases. So they are not consumables versus these are like mundane consumables. Almost you have a PC, you need a NIC card. If the motherboard has a NIC card, you need additional NIC card. You put extra PCIe to Ethernet gigabit interface. So hope this video is interesting. I do get sometimes messages apart from YouTube comments, sometimes in LinkedIn or even emails. So what is the thing I want to keep my channel is I do like education, but I don't want to be a full-time trainer or something. I do of course teach on almost everyday basis to my students, and of course I do work on everyday basis with my clients as well. Okay, but what happens is I don't want to keep a full-time education or teaching as a full-time. The problem with full-time teaching is you are not in touch with the real world. You are not at all in touch with what is happening in the current industry. Okay, versus a guy like me, I do enjoy working on real projects and real challenges in the industry, interacting with my clients and stuff. That's where the fun part is, but at the same time it is also interesting to teach certain aspects to my students. See, although I have mentioned I'm working with a client, I didn't mention exactly what client I'm working and what is the product exactly we are working and stuff, because I need to sign up NDAs for whatever it is. I can disclose this much, but I can't disclose more than that. Okay, what exactly is the product, and what is the reason we have to use or explore this smart NIC cards and stuff. So I need to cut short what I discuss in videos. But having said, it is fun always to teach stuff to the people, but at the same time I don't want to make it mundane teaching as my full-time as well, because full-time teaching is always a bad idea. Unfortunately, we have this Western education where we have all this college system and schools and stuff, which they do teach, but the teachers they hire, or the professors and lecturers they hire, are almost they are full-time teachers or trainers. The unfortunate aspect is they don't have any touch with the real world stuff. They never do any real world stuff, so they lack a lot of that sort of an exposure. Okay, if you are working in any organization, you will be, in touch with real world stuff. So it is always exciting to know what is happening in the industry and learn, because you may work on a project. So learn, if something it demands, maybe my videos may help to bridge that gap, because your manager is not a person who can sit with you and train you or something like that, and sometimes not even your team leads or something like that. So I want to keep this channel a niche, not discussing that regular topics, the typical tech topics which you will find everywhere in the textbooks. Okay, what is the NIC card, what is networking, introduction to networking, you will find in all textbooks. That's not an issue. But what is the thing is, you need the current stuff, what is happening in the industry. So I want to keep the channel and the topics quite niche. So hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have anything to discuss, be in touch via mail or post your small queries in YouTube comments. Thanks a lot for joining me. Stay tuned. Have a nice day. Bye bye.